Have you ever felt like a man is almost obsessed with you, but then suddenly pulls back, goes silent, or acts distant? It's confusing, right? One moment he's deeply interested, the next he's acting like he's unsure. What if I told you that this behavior doesn't mean he's losing interest? In fact, it can mean the exact opposite. Some men don't run away because they don't care. They run because they care too much, and that terrifies them. Today, you're going to discover the 3 subtle but powerful things a man does when he's secretly obsessed with you, but too scared to fully show it. And once you understand this, you'll never misread his behavior again. You know that feeling when he leans in closer, when his energy is fully there, when his attention is locked on you, like you're the only person in the room. And for a moment, it feels undeniable. He's present, he's engaged, he's almost intense in the way he connects with you. And just when you start to relax into that feeling, just when you think, okay, this is real, something shifts. He pulls back. The messages slow down. The warmth fades just enough to make you question everything. And that's the moment most people misunderstand. Because it looks like inconsistency, it feels like mixed signals. It makes you wonder if he's playing games or if he's just not that interested. But what's really happening beneath the surface is far more complicated and far more revealing. When a man starts to feel something strong, something that goes beyond surface level attraction, it creates a kind of internal pressure. At first, he moves towards you naturally. That's the part you see clearly. The curiosity, the excitement, the way he finds reasons to talk to you, to be around you, to connect. That's not forced, that's instinct. But then comes the part he doesn't fully understand himself. The closer he gets, the more real it becomes. And the more real it becomes, the more he starts to feel exposed. Because now it's not just about attraction, it's about emotional risk. It's about the possibility of rejection, of losing control, of caring more than he's ready to handle. So what does he do? He steps back. Not because the feeling disappeared, but because it got stronger than he expected. That pullback isn't a sign that you imagine things. It's often a sign that what he felt was real enough to scare him. And instead of leaning into it, he creates space to regain control of his emotions. He tells himself to slow down, to not get too invested, to protect himself before it goes too far. And from your side, it feels confusing because you experienced his closeness. You felt his attention. You saw the way he showed up when he wasn't holding back. So when he retreats, it doesn't match what you just experienced. It creates doubt. But here's the truth. Real inconsistency comes from a lack of interest. This kind of pattern comes from a conflict between desire and fear. He wants to move closer, but he's afraid of what happens if he does. He wants to express more, but he holds himself back. He feels something deeper, but he doesn't fully trust it yet. So he moves in and then he pulls away. And the mistake most people make in that moment is chasing the version of him that leaned in, trying to recreate that closeness, trying to get him back to that point. But the more pressure he feels, the more he retreats. Because now it's not just his emotions he's managing, it's yours too. What actually shifts this dynamic is understanding it, recognizing that his pullback isn't always rejection. It's often hesitation. It's him trying to process feelings he didn't plan on having. Because a man who feels nothing stays consistent in his distance, but a man who feels too much struggles to stay steady in his closeness. And when you see that clearly, you stop taking every step back as a loss and start recognizing it for what it really is, a sign that something deeper is happening beneath the surface. There's another shift you start to notice if you pay close attention, not in what he says, but in how he looks at you, how he listens, how he seems to take in every little detail without always responding the way you expect. It's subtle, almost easy to miss if you're only focused on words, because we're taught to measure interest by how much someone talks, how openly they express themselves, how clearly they define what they feel. But with him, it doesn't always show up like that. Instead, he watches, not in a distant or disconnected way, but in a way that feels focused, intentional. You might catch him looking at you when you're not directly engaged with him. You might notice how he picks up on small shifts in your mood before you've said anything. He remembers things you mentioned casually, things you didn't think mattered enough to stick. And when he does speak, it often connects directly to something you shared earlier, something small, something specific. And that's when you start to realize he's paying attention on a deeper level than he's expressing. Because for some men, especially when they feel something intense but aren't fully comfortable expressing it, observation becomes their way of staying close without feeling exposed. Talking requires vulnerability. It requires clarity, confidence, and a willingness to reveal what's going on inside. And when those emotions feel overwhelming or unfamiliar, he may not have the words for them yet or the courage to say them out loud. So instead of speaking more, he notices more. He studies your reactions. He listens between your words. He tries to understand who you are without asking too many direct questions that might reveal how much he actually cares. It's his way of staying connected while still protecting himself. And from the outside, it can feel confusing because you might think, if he really liked me, wouldn't he just say it? Wouldn't he express more? Wouldn't he make it obvious? And that expectation makes sense, but not everyone processes emotion through expression. Some people process it through awareness. He's not silent because he's empty. He's silent because he's full and trying to make sense of what he feels before he risks saying something he can't take back. That's why his attention feels different. It's not casual. It's not surface level. It has a kind of depth to it that doesn't need constant words to exist. And if you really tune into it, you start to notice that even in moments when he's quiet, he's still very present. But here's where it matters. How you interpret that silence changes everything. If you assume silence means disinterest, you'll start to pull away or overcompensate, trying to get a reaction, trying to make him open up faster than he's ready to. And that pressure can make him retreat even more because now the situation feels emotionally demanding instead of natural. But if you understand that his silence can be a form of emotional caution, not absence, you stop forcing the moment. You give space for things to unfold without rushing them into clarity before they're ready. Because a man who isn't interested doesn't pay attention like that. He doesn't remember the small things. He doesn't tune into your energy. He doesn't observe you with that level of quiet focus. But a man who feels something deeper, something he's not fully ready to express, he watches more than he speaks. And sometimes what he notices says far more than anything he could put into words. And then there's a moment that tends to reveal more than he ever intends it to. It's not something he plans, and it's definitely not something he wants to make obvious, but you can feel it when it happens. It's that slight shift in his energy when another man enters the picture, even if it's just in conversation. You casually mention someone, maybe a friend, maybe a coworker, maybe even just a passing story, and something about him changes. It's subtle. He doesn't explode. He doesn't openly react. He doesn't necessarily question you directly. In fact, he often tries to do the opposite. He tries to act like it doesn't matter at all. He keeps his tone neutral, maybe even a little too neutral. He might brush it off, change the subject, or respond in a way that feels almost overly controlled. But if you're paying attention, you'll notice it. There's a slight tension, a pause that wasn't there before, a shift in the way he carries himself. It's like for a brief moment, his emotions surface before he quickly pulls them back in. And that moment tells you everything you need to know. Because jealousy, especially when it's unspoken, doesn't come from indifference. It comes from emotional investment. It comes from caring enough to feel threatened by the idea of losing your attention, even if he hasn't fully claimed a place in your life yet. And that's what makes it so complex for him. On one hand, he feels something real. He feels drawn to you, connected to you, maybe even attached in a way he didn't expect. But on the other hand, he hasn't fully allowed himself to express that. He hasn't clearly defined where he stands. And because of that, he doesn't feel like he has the right to react openly. So instead of expressing jealousy directly, he suppresses it. He tells himself to stay calm, to not overreact, to not reveal too much. Because in his mind, showing jealousy might expose how much he actually cares. And that's exactly what he's trying to keep under control. But emotions don't disappear just because you try to hide them. They leak out in small, almost invisible ways. In tone, in timing, in body language, in the way he suddenly becomes a little more distant or a little more focused all at once. And this is where many people misread the situation. They see the lack of direct reaction and assume there's no feeling there. They think if he cared, he would say something. If it bothered him, he would show it. But that's not always how it works, especially for someone who is already struggling with vulnerability. For him, the challenge isn't feeling, it's allowing himself to show what he feels. So instead of confronting it, he internalizes it. He processes it quietly. He tries to regain control over his emotions before they become too visible. And sometimes that means creating a little distance again. Not because he's losing interest, but because he's trying to manage how much he's already invested. And if you really understand this, you stop looking for loud reactions as proof of care. You start recognizing the quiet signals, the ones he doesn't intend to send but can't fully hide either. Because a man who feels nothing doesn't react at all. There's no shift, no tension, no change in energy. It's flat, consistent, and detached. But a man who feels something deeper, something he's not ready to admit, he may hide it, he may control it, he may even deny it. But in certain moments, especially when he feels like he could lose you, it shows. And it's in those unguarded moments that you catch a glimpse of how much you actually matter. And then there's something even quieter, something that doesn't show up in big gestures or dramatic moments, but reveals itself over time in the smallest, almost invisible ways. It's not about what he says in the moment. It's about what he remembers later, the little things, the details you didn't repeat, the things you mentioned once and then forgot about. But somehow he didn't. You might be talking casually one day and bring up something random, your favorite snack, a place you've always wanted to visit, a memory from your childhood that didn't seem like a big deal. It passes like any normal conversation. No emphasis, no expectation, and then days or even weeks later, he brings it up again. Not in a forced way, not like he's trying to impress you, but naturally, like it stayed with him. And that's when it hits you. He's been paying attention in a way most people don't, because remembering small details isn't something people do when they're only half interested. It requires presence. It requires emotional engagement. It means that when you were speaking, he wasn't just hearing you, he was absorbing you. And this becomes even more meaningful when you connect it to everything else you've seen, the way he comes close and then pulls away, the way he watches more than he speaks, the way he tries to hide his reactions when something affects him. All of it points to someone who feels deeply, but doesn't always express it directly. So instead of expressing through words or bold actions, he expresses through attention. He remembers how you take your coffee. He notices when your mood shifts even slightly. He recalls something you said in passing and brings it back at the exact moment it matters. And these aren't grand cinematic gestures, but they're real. They're consistent in a quiet way. And that's what makes it so easy to overlook, because we're often conditioned to look for big signs, big declarations, obvious effort, clear communication. And when those things aren't always present, we assume something is missing. But sometimes what's actually happening is just being expressed differently. For him, remembering is his way of holding on to you without having to fully open up about what you mean to him. It's safer. It doesn't require him to expose his emotions directly, but it still allows him to stay connected, to show care in a way that feels controlled. And if you really think about it, that kind of attention is intentional. People don't store details about someone unless that person occupies space in their mind, unless they replay conversations, unless they think back to moments, unless they feel something worth holding on to. It's not random. It's not accidental. It's a reflection of where his focus is and where his feelings are growing, even if he hasn't said it out loud. But again, this is where interpretation matters. If you dismiss these moments because they seem small, you miss the pattern. You overlook the consistency behind them. You assume that because he's not always expressive, he's not invested. But in reality, he's showing you his investment in the way he knows how, through memory, through attention, through presence in the details. And when you start to notice that pattern, you begin to see him more clearly, not just for what he says, but for what he consistently shows in subtle ways. Because a man who isn't thinking about you doesn't remember you like that. He doesn't hold on to the small things. He doesn't carry pieces of your conversations with him when you're not around. But a man who feels something deeper, even if he's trying to keep it under control, he remembers, and those small details he holds on to are often the clearest proof that you've been on his mind far more than he's willing to admit. And then you come to the part that feels the most frustrating, the part that makes you question everything, even when you've already seen so many signs that something real is there. It's his inconsistency. One day he's fully present, engaged, attentive, making you feel like you matter in a way that's hard to ignore. And then, without warning, something shifts. He becomes distant, slower to respond, less expressive. It's not a complete disappearance, but it's enough to make you feel the difference. And that contrast is what creates confusion, because when someone is consistently distant, it's easier to accept. You don't expect much, so you don't read into it. But when someone shows you depth and then pulls it back, it leaves you trying to understand what changed. You start replaying conversations, analyzing your actions, wondering if you did something wrong, wondering if you imagined the connection in the first place. But this kind of inconsistency doesn't come from a lack of feeling. It comes from not knowing how to handle what he feels. When a man isn't emotionally invested, his behavior tends to stay simple. He either shows up or he doesn't. There's no real fluctuation because there's no internal struggle driving it. But when he does feel something deeper, something that pulls him in emotionally, it creates tension inside him. Part of him wants to move closer, to stay consistent, to build on what's already there. But another part of him hesitates. It questions the pace, the intensity, the risk. It asks, what if this goes too far? What if I lose control? What if I get hurt? And instead of resolving that conflict, he moves back and forth between those two states. So when he feels safe, when he's not overthinking, when he's just in the moment, he shows up fully. That's when you see the best version of him, the version that's connected, open in his own way, naturally drawn to you without resistance. But then the awareness kicks in. He starts to realize how much he's investing, how much space you're taking up in his thoughts, how much influence you have over his emotions. And that awareness can feel overwhelming, especially if he's not used to that level of emotional intensity. So he pulls back, not because he wants to lose you, but because he's trying to regain balance within himself. He's trying to slow things down, to create distance between what he feels and how much control he thinks he should have over it. And from your perspective, it feels like a shift in interest. It feels like something is fading. But from his perspective, it's often an attempt to manage something that feels like it's growing too fast. This is why his actions don't always align with his feelings. Not because the feelings aren't there, but because he hasn't fully learned how to act in alignment with them yet. He's still navigating that space between wanting connection and fearing the consequences of it. And the more you react to that inconsistency with pressure, with urgency, with the need for immediate clarity, the more it amplifies his hesitation. Because now it's not just his emotions he's dealing with. It's the expectation to be certain before he's ready. But when you understand what's really driving his behavior, you stop personalizing every shift. You stop assuming that distance means disinterest. You start seeing the pattern not as a game, but as a reflection of his internal struggle. Because a man who doesn't care doesn't go back and forth. He doesn't invest deeply one moment and retreat the next. There's no emotional weight behind his actions. But a man who feels something real, something that challenges him, something that pulls him out of his comfort zone, he struggles to stay consistent, not because he lacks interest, but because he's trying to find a way to handle just how much he actually feels. And then there's one of the most misunderstood behaviors of all, because on the surface, it can look intentional, even manipulative. But when you look deeper, you realize it's often something he's not even fully aware he's doing. It's the way he tests you without realizing it. Not with clear questions, not with direct conversations, but through small shifts in his behavior that are meant to answer something he hasn't been able to ask out loud. He might take longer to reply, even when you know he saw the message. He might pull back slightly after a moment of closeness. He might act a little more distant than usual, almost as if he's waiting to see what you'll do next. And in those moments, it can feel confusing, even frustrating, because it creates uncertainty where things once felt clear. But what's really happening beneath the surface isn't a game. It's a search for reassurance. When someone feels deeply but isn't fully secure in expressing it, they look for indirect ways to understand where they stand. Instead of asking, "Do you care about me?" or "What do I mean to you?" he creates situations where your response gives him that answer without him having to expose his vulnerability directly. So when he delays a response, part of him is watching to see, will you get upset or will you stay calm? When he pulls back slightly, he's noticing, will you chase him or will you remain grounded? When he becomes a little distant, he's observing, do you lose your sense of self or do you stay consistent in who you are? And he's not always doing this consciously. It's not a calculated strategy. It's a protective instinct. Because asking directly requires him to risk hearing something he might not be ready for, but observing your reactions feels safer. It gives him information without requiring him to fully step into emotional exposure. And this ties into everything you've already seen. The closeness followed by distance, the quiet observation, the hidden jealousy, the way he remembers details, the inconsistency in how he shows up. All of it points to someone who feels something real, but hasn't fully found stability within those feelings yet. So instead of expressing clearly, he creates moments that reveal the truth indirectly. But here's where this becomes important for you. If you respond to those moments with anxiety, with overreaction, with the need to chase or prove something, it doesn't give him the reassurance he's looking for. It actually reinforces his fear that emotions lead to instability, that getting closer means losing control. But when you respond with calmness, with self-respect, with consistency, it answers his unspoken questions in a way that feels safe to him. It shows him that connection doesn't have to mean chaos, that feelings don't have to lead to pressure. And over time, that's what allows him to lower his guard. Because what he's really trying to figure out isn't just how you feel about him. It's whether it's safe for him to feel this much about you. And once he starts to see that it is, once he realizes that he doesn't have to protect himself as much as he thought, those tests begin to fade. The distance becomes less frequent. The hesitation starts to soften. And what was once indirect begins to turn into something more steady, more open, more real. Because a man who feels nothing doesn't test anything. He doesn't look for answers. He doesn't observe reactions. He doesn't create space to understand where he stands. But a man who feels something deeper, something he doesn't fully know how to handle yet, he tests in silence, watches your response, and slowly decides whether it's safe to step closer or not. And in those quiet moments, he's not trying to push you away. He's trying to find a reason to stay.